Okay, we are theoretically running. Let us get our little advert on the road here. Welcome to Evolution Hour on the 10th of March, 2025, in our time of doom. Various analog devices, etc., etc., and so forth and so on. Remember the WordPress.com, a bunch of stuff there, freebie PDFs for everybody. We are presumably sticking on that same older channel that included a few of my older posts from way back when because the laptop here has suddenly changed its mind as to who I am on Restream. So we are running with that, at least for the time being. So I've been alerting everybody when I put the posting up on Twitter and on Blue Sky that this is the new old channel, and you need to probably resubscribe to the old channel in order to get the alerts through YouTube and all the rest. What can I say? I don't know what the hell is going on. Anyway, at least we are theoretically on a little show. So, as you know, we are continuing through Titans. Isn't that cute little Tyrannosaurus? Isn't that sweet? The chapter now is on dinosaur diets, and it's heavily weighted towards a bunch of creationist retreads. So it's going to be a ways before we'll be bumping into a technical paper. But it starts off with a theological argument because they need to have the death causing or sin causing death thing in the theology. So I'm going to inflict upon you some links to their people that they were putting up just to give you a flavor of the kind of apologetics that's going on in YEC land. There's a 2014 post from Dave Pittman that they cited on the Nefesh Chaya. And then they bring up the book of Isaiah, claiming that it, quote, clearly, Isaiah, as though Isaiah were clearly a person in this, clearly understood a pre-fall animal life as real history. Mm-hmm. And for that, they cited a 2005 post from Don Batten to expound on all the end times and early times and the apologetics that they have. So this is a much bigger theological frame that they're trying to ram all of this into. And that Batten post has been put up by CMI at least as of 2023. So it's kind of like what they consider the current shtick. The part two relates to in 2023, Royal Truman, creationist, and his little co-writer, Chris Basil, who's kind of a newcomer on the YEC landscape, added another installment to Truman's long-going screeds on the origin of life, and particularly chirality issues, where he's just running on and on and on about how it's physically impossible for the chiral mix that we find in biology by Luca times, so it's hundreds of millions of years after the origin of life. But of course, he's a young Earth creationist, so that's not falling into place. And anyway, this post I'll be putting a thing up on amino acid proportions and the curious role that isovaline plays in all of this, or at least in the version that Royal Truman wants. An awful lot of the stuff are older sources that he was retreading, going all the way back to 1981, which is yikes, 40 years ago from his post. But there is a 2011 work by Breslau that he's citing, except initial draft that was withdrawn and placed a few months later in a version that's not the one that they're citing. So they're citing a preprint. And I'll be putting a link up so that you can at least see the bit on that. It's not an open access one. But along the way, they bump into some current stuff on the role that little amino acid is playing in potential origin of life issues and the like. And it's actually some really nice, interesting material that I'm not sure Truman and company really want you to be looking at. There's a 2020 paper from Fox on the acceleration of amino acid racemation by isovaline and possible implications for homochirality and biosignature. So that doesn't sound like it's really helping their case much. And then there's also a 2019 paper that I would like you to check out that's on this related theme that's not being cited by them. It's from Nature. Then there's a 2023 work from Bakova and a 2024 one from you. on enantiomer-enriched amino acids via peptide-mediated transamination reactions. So what we're talking about are processes early in the history of life where you've got all sorts of chemical reactions going on with these amino acids, and particularly isovaline. And basically, Truman and company are just kind of like trying to keep up with the material and sweep as much of it under the rug as possible. So anyway, I'm putting that stuff up as an example of where you can see where that little niche compartment of origins or busts are going. I spent much of time today, and I put a little note that I'll be putting up in the video description on the fact that we're keeping you posted on the work for Rocks Were There Volume 2. And by a curious coincidence, I stumbled onto a new Vice Rhino video that was going into a criticism of Calvin Smith, the Canadian Answers in Genesis guy, who various others, Dan Stern Cardinale and others, have also done some little videos. I think Dapper Dino and that crowd also did some criticisms of this thing. So it's quite recent work from like 2023, thereabouts. And each one of them are kind of, the critics that have been going into this have pointed out kind of different aspects of the bits. Well, this one that Vice Rhino did happened to bring up a thing relating to a quote from Erik Trinkaus from 1978 that got quote mined. And when I looked in my resource base, I actually had the article that he had been writing on it. It was in Natural History magazine. The quote was about Neanderthals, and Smith quote mined this thing, which Vice Rhino found was seemingly only popping up in creationist apologetics, and that raised my hackles right there. The quote is, detailed comparison of Neanderthal skeletal remains with those of modern humans have shown that there is nothing in Neanderthal anatomy that conclusively indicates locomotor, manipulative, intellectual, or linguistic abilities inferior to those of modern humans, unquote. Which was a perfectly valid thing to say in 1978. It's a perfectly valid thing to say in 2025. But it's not relating to the issue are Neanderthals the same species as human beings? And the overall upshot of things is, why bother with an authority quote from Erik Trinkaus from 1978 when you could be dealing with all the vast amounts of technical literature that has come along since then? So I got kind of intrigued by all of this. And I already had some material in. David Menton had been playing this quote up at least since the 1990s. And another time again in 2010, and it's all been recycled in Answers in Genesis Apologetics. And that's when I realized that the vast majority of stuff on this is Answers in Genesis retreads, or people copying Answers in Genesis. So it's kind of their little hobby horse that it pops up in a peripheral number of people. It also pops up in Harun Yahya. There we go. Which all of this is going to be covered in more detail in Rocks Were There Volume 2. But I was kind of intrigued to see who all was coming up with this thing. And it turns out that the vast majority of people who are posting this quote are taking it as a package blob, including Calvin Smith. Smith turned out to have a post that I was finally able to track down that turns actually the script for their Calvin Smith's video that Vice Rhinos and others are copying on. Evolution over time, the best proofs of evolution come and go. You can Google search that fairly straightforwardly. I'm not going to be putting a direct link to it, although it'll be the information when we get around to Rocks Were There Volume 2. But it's quite intriguing how set in their ways the creationists can be on quote mining, because this is not examples. I've quite a few of these things from basic 2010 to the present. And this material from Calvin Smith is a blog from October the 2nd, 2023. So they're still banging this stupid little drum. Why would anyone care what Erik Trinkaus thought in 1978 unless they were simply addicted to the quote mine? And so it's indicative of the creationist mindset, where they latch on to little blips and pieces, and then they get metastasized by people who copy them all around through the various blogosphere. I encountered not a huge number people who were making use of this little quote. I haven't yet gone through to burrow to see how much of it's popping up in the classic material. Is it materializing in Henry Morris, doing Gibb, that crowd? I haven't checked through my back material for my hard copies of their books. Also, Luther Sunderland is a possibility. And the various little parasites that pop up off of ICR. So it'll be intriguing to kind of get a measure as to whether or not this quote is entering the apologetics trail through Menton, or whether or not it's one that he is covering secondarily. It wouldn't surprise me one way or the other. But anyway, we do certainly have that little trail of a relatively small number of people online who are following up on the footsteps of things, including there was this one from Evolution Frauds from somebody named Matt. And as far as I could tell from the material, it's probably from 2009. It's not actually dated, but it had absolutely terrible spelling. It says evolution isn't science, wordpress.com. And it's filled full of really appallingly bad spelling. And he does Ernst Haeckel's Evolution Embryo Fraud, Piltdown Man, Nebraska Man, Java Man is false, Neanderthal Man, another deliberate fraud by evolutionist scientists and that. And it consists of a chunk of stuff that he's basically copied off of various other creationists, including secondarily I think the apologetics version of that Trinkaus quote. So it's a beautiful illustration of the mindset of creationists who are in a bubble of authority quoting, when we have an absolutely vast technical literature on all of these subjects, which you wouldn't have to worry about an article from Natural History, which was a kind of Scientific American level secondary coverage, just not technical literature. And it literally occurred to them to deal with that. Another little bit that I'm reminded of is the Piltdown Man, Nebraska Man connection. And as far as I can tell, in my familiarity with the material, this is almost exclusively a young Earth creationist fetish. That when Piltdown gets mentioned, you'll get Nebraska Man. Or if Nebraska Man is the lead, they'll be mentioned in Piltdown any second now. Whereas I can't think offhand of any intelligent designers who have really dove into the Nebraska Man angle. They occasionally have done some posting on Piltdown Man, but that reflexive Pavlovian connection of Piltdown and Nebraska Man, that dates back all the way to the Duane Gish, Henry Morris era, and it's just been obsessive ever since. And so you can see that popping up where they naturally think that that's relevant, and they don't even get the facts straight. They're simply playing off of the apologetics of all of that. So all that's going to get covered in delicious detail in the Human Evolution section of Rocks for Their Volume 2. I've also been continuing to tidy up my little Big Bang chronology chart for Volume 2 that will take up a whole bloody page. That breaks everything down into the time frames and the energy levels and the size of the universe and all that kind of stuff. Kind of an intriguing thing that pops up is there's no standard candle measurement of when things are happening in the Big Bang. It's like there is, in the first second or so, you've got everything measured functionally by Planck time, which is like 10 to the minus 43rd second time that light takes to cross a nucleus of a hydrogen atom. So that's the smallest measure that they can deal with in physics. And so you've got a bunch of things happening that involve upwards of 10 to the 20th power Planck ticks. But you've got stuff that's taking place in a relatively quick time frame initially. So you've got the Planck epoch involves basically one click of the thing. And then the grand unification epoch takes the next 10 to the 7th power ticks, which gets us down to the 10 to the minus 36 seconds. Then the electroweak and inflationary epochs, that's 10 to the 4th and then a 10 to the 20th power ticks. And then everything kind of speeds up again to where the quark epoch is occurring over 10 to the 7th ticks, and then the hadron epoch at 10 to the 5th. That gets us up to like the first, close to first second. And then things are starting to spread outwards, and no longer the physicists don't really pay attention to anything in terms of the Planck time, because it's just too many big, ginormous numbers. Then you can start dealing with normal things like seconds, minutes, years, millions of years, billions of years, as we gradually move through. So we have then where the physics is basically defining what the circumstances are, out to about 370,000 years after the Big Bang. And then there is a period of like 150 million years, the Dark Age, when there aren't any stars shining yet and dark matter is dominating things. And then you get, after that 150 million years, now you're having reionization, and you're starting to see stars and galaxies. And a lot of that is the stuff that's then being studied by Hubble on the James Webb Telescope and all of that. So I wanted to have in one tidy little package kind of a primer guide to get a lot of the little niggling details available, so that people can kind of follow along as we go into the more detail, both in terms of what the technical science literature has developed over time, the process of working out how the Hubble constant was, the eccentricities of there's still a gap between how old and how many things there should be based on measuring things from the Big Bang forward versus measuring things from the observable universe backwards. And there's still a bit of a mismatch. There's a little S sub 8 and H sub 0 that come up with slightly different numbers. And although orders of magnitude difference, but nevertheless relatively slightly compared to some of these other things. And this, of course, means that we've got oodles of really fascinating issues in physics, which creationists of the young Earth creationist stripes will highlight under the trick to think that, well, the only alternative is 6-day creation. Boop. And so there's a great deal of disingenuity there. Meanwhile, if you go over to the old Earth creationist and intelligent design side, where they're just happy to have all of the Big Bang stuff, they tend to kind of downplay the various uncertainties going on between the various models, because they want to hold that as the big creation ex nihilo, and so they tend to ignore those topics. So it's an intriguing little sidebar, whereas the regular scientists of whatever philosophical position just want to try to figure out what all the facts are. And it's clear enough that we've got enough of the universe that's out there that in one sense is kind of peripheral, because the stuff that we have is all of that baryonic matter stuff that makes up stars and the like. And yet tons of things are going on. Most of what's going on in the universe are sort of below the radar, to where it doesn't change the rate at which hammers fall if you drop them on your foot, but nonetheless bears upon issues of why galaxies are forming in the way they are early in the universe, and what happened to matter and antimatter, whether or not the curvature and fabric of space-time is maybe not entirely uniform. That kind of gets you into things about modified gravity theories, the Mond models, and all of these models have their strengths and weaknesses, but there are times in sections of things where it seems to fade out, and one group will do well and another one will do badly, and another one that'll flip in other areas, which to my mind is simply indicating that we've got too many question marks operating that need to be resolved. And to some extent, you have to have much bigger particle accelerators to resolve some of these things. And maybe you can't build particle accelerators big enough to be able to work all of these things out. So effectively, you're only using the laboratory of observation that you can see in the actual universe to try to work all of that out and then map in what you have about the physics. So it makes for a really exciting and fun period. And my goal is to try to keep up as best as possible with all the latest technical literature, and also then track the relatively small number of creationist apologists who burrow into the area. A relatively small number. This is an area that's very difficult to get geeky about unless you are a full-fledged physicist. So there's not a huge number of those in the young Earth creationist field. So it's a relatively small bunch. And their stuff tends not to get highlighted too much in the apologetics literature for the common folk. They'd much rather go off on soft tissue and things like that you can kind of wrap your head around. rather than try to deal with things where they got to work out formulas with summation signs and differentials and all these other little things that are going to just drive them nuts and make it too complicated. Meanwhile, of course, the regular physicists aren't paying the slightest attention to the creationist apologetics. So all of that's going to be covered in the new book. The one area, once I get the big chapter on the cosmology thing under my belt, and there'll be one big section that I've got to deal with, which is the chapter breaking down the kinds for the arc encounter and to show the muddle that's going on in that conception. Plus, it will provide a nice solid data field where anybody who wants to examine individual taxa and the like will be able to burrow in, because we'll be listing the stuff alphabetically as well as thematically. And so people can find out a lot about all of that stuff. So it's going to be an interesting bit. And there's a certain amount of confusion between at some of the little detailed levels as to how many kinds there are and which ones they are. The Ark Encounter and Nathaniel Jensen and this Sarfatian table. They seem to be at kind of loggerheads as to some of the little peripheral ones. Needless to say, the breakdown of exactly how many pterosaurs there are, all of that stuff works. The Tay bunch don't even venture into it. At least you do get at least a stab. Basically, they're going by families, but the kind of biogeographical material and the detailed issues of what preservation can work even at that level of kinds, plus trying to figure out how you could possibly get the extant species from the kinds that survived the post-flood period, because remember, 54% of the kinds went extinct, according to that. Well, anyway, we're nearing up to about half an hour on this. Let me put my little advert thanking everyone for the Patreons. I'm assuming that an awful lot of the regular viewers who would be in the chat haven't cottoned on to the fact that this is a different platform channel. And hopefully more will find out about that as they work their way through. I'll probably have to put some notifications up in Facebook and a few other little spots, some of our little chat groups, to remind everybody that it's a different old channel that they got to go to and subscribe to. So anyway, we will do whatever we can one way or t'other on that. Let me thank everybody. Put up our window here. Thanks everyone who have been colleagues and researchers and assistant researchers and friends and legacy patrons all over the years. I bear in mind the fact that as we slide towards potential economic doom, there may be some of you out there in internet land that will not be able to keep plugging away in support of the channel. I'm entirely aware of the ups and downs on that. But at any rate, everybody hang in there as best you can. Okay. And then let's also put up our little advert for the Rocks Were There book. Oops. There. Okie doke. It always amazes me that any of these internet postings and that can happen at all. It's amazing that I can sit here in my den in Spokane, Washington, and stuff appears that is visible in principle by people all over the planet, unless they're being blocked by totalitarian regimes. We will continue plowing away with all the things that we do. I'm acting as a bit of an editor as well for Jackson, who is moving into some videos on social issues and the political matters. I have an awareness of the background history because I lived through a lot of this stuff. So it makes for a nice little combination. And some of that stuff I think will eventually get folded into some future books, including the work on the conspiracy thinking stuff. Okay. Well, I do not see anybody in the chat. So I'm assuming then that I'm still kind of in a little hole on that. I will continue spreading the word. We are slightly truncated, not quite a half an hour. Everybody stay safe. If you're in environments that are potentially hazardous for one reason or another, hunker down, and we will plow along, and we will be seeing you all again next week on this channel.